Editing Andrea. I could have let it go, but actually I couldn't. I just wanted to briefly acknowledge how chaotic this video is. It's very rambly. My wrap-ups are not consistent. I spend like at least 5 minutes talking about House of Leaves. I get it. I see it. I'm a little all over the place. And then by the end, I realized that I had not included any star graphics for my actual reviews, but with the amount of time that it took to record and edit, I decided I'm not going back in there. So enjoy. Make sure your seats are in their upright and locked positions. And here we go. This is gonna take forever. There's so many books. So many books. Some of my favorite videos to watch are wrap-ups. Some of the best recommendations I get are from like monthly wrap-ups. And so because I'm starting my channel now in the middle of the year, I myself didn't want to leave anything out of my own wrap-ups. So what my plan is to do a quarterly wrap-up. This is going to be the first quarter of 2021. And then next month, I'm going to do the second quarter of 2021. And that will catch me up through the first 6 months of the year. And then starting in August, I will have regular monthly wrap-ups that will not be a million years long. Here we go. First book, There But For The by Ali Smith. This is about a man, well, the book is not about the man, but a man locks himself in the spare bedroom of a home during a dinner party. And the woman that owns the home looks it through his belongings, comes across his phone, and tries to contact everyone in his phone to get a hold of someone that he knows to try to get him out of her house. So she ends up contacting someone he knows only nominally. And so the story is actually about the woman and how she deals with being called upon for assistance in this way, and her relationship with the daughter of the woman that lives in the house. I gave this book 3 stars. It was great. It was well written. It was smart. Pace was a little slow, but I mean, it was good. I enjoyed it. Second book I read was The Bastard of Istanbul by Elif Shafak. This was for a book club that I belong to. And we chose this book because on a whim, arbitrarily, we decided that we wanted to read books this year that featured cats in some way. We found that a good way to kind of like direct our book selection. And there is a cat, or there is a series of generations of cat in this book. I don't know if I want to include summaries to all of these books because it will take forever, but The Bastard of Istanbul is essentially about 2 young women. One is Armenian American, and she feels that she has to travel to Istanbul to kind of reconcile her identity. She stays with the family of the second young woman, who is Turkish and was born illegitimate, and she also feels like a part of her identity is missing. So they develop this relationship. It's wonderfully told, and it is a very sensory experience. Shafak is excellent at describing atmosphere and food, particularly, but it is again a very sensory experience. I enjoyed the book quite a bit, gave it 3 stars. Next is Odd Girl Out, My Extraordinary Autistic Life by Laura James. I had decided, since my very recent diagnosis, that I was going to make it a point that I read one book by a neurodivergent author every month. And so this was my first one. This is a memoir by James, who chronicles essentially her, like, the year following her own diagnosis. She was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder at the age of 45. She had already married, had children, established a career as a respected journalist, but felt increasing difficulty in navigating the world around her. And she becomes preoccupied with the 2016 American election. So I should preface by saying that Laura James is British and so was not directly affected by it, became obsessed with following the election on the news and on Twitter. This is a common trend. You'll find that women who are generally underdiagnosed for any diverse neurotype, that they tend to be diagnosed later in life as they tend to struggle more. I enjoyed this as a memoir. I do love a memoir. And for my taste, personally, it was a little out of order, but extraordinarily well written, as you would expect a memoir by a journalist to be. And I'm not going to judge anyone who is neurodivergent and how they write a chronicle of their own life, because they put it in an order that made sense to them. So that's not going to affect my rating at all. Very, very good. I gave it 4 stars. Next is The Year 1000, When Explorers Connected the World and Globalization Began by Valerie Hansen. This might sound a little weird, maybe not when you get to know more of me, but listening to a big, beefy, historical nonfiction audiobook is just such a pleasant experience for me. I think it's just because I did it a lot during my undergrad, and it is surprisingly just a very good stress relief. I would be lying to you if I said I remembered a great deal of what happened in this book, which I suppose is the downside to listening to academic audiobooks. The majority of the ones that I listen to are ones that I already own and have listened to a number of times. So the information that I have retained from these books are because I have listened to them over and over again. I don't expect to do that with this one. This was just an audiobook that I found on Scribd, but I did ultimately enjoy it. 3 stars. Okay, next is Wow, No Thank You by Samantha Irby. I don't know what to say about this one necessarily. You know, Samantha Irby, if you know, you know. But this is a collection of essays by Irby about living with her chronic illness and being a stepmom and dealing with her success. I bought all of her books out of order. Not that you necessarily need to read them in order, as they are just essays, but because they are so personal, I feel like if I had read them in order, I would have been provided with a little more context, but that's not super important. Poignant, hilarious, 4 stars. Adventures in Memory, The Science and Secrets of Human Memory. This one was not what I expected it to be. It wasn't bad, but it's just not what I expected. This is a book written by a pair of sisters, one who is a neuroscientist, the other is a writer. They write predominantly about animal studies, which was fun and interesting. I honestly expected it to be more of a biological explanation of memory as opposed to a sociological one, but again, it was good. 3 stars. Next is Strike Your Heart by Emily Notham. This is about the main character, Diane, and just in general, her relationship to women. She's born to a woman who is pathologically jealous of her as a child, and so doesn't really nurture her in a way that one would consider appropriate, emotionally appropriate. And then has another daughter whom she does love very much and spoils. So as Diane gets older, she is a professor in a university, and then she seeks out a mentor who's named Olivia, and they become close. And then Diane discovers that Olivia has a young daughter who essentially treats her daughter in the same way that she remembers her mother treating her. So there's a twist, so I'm not going to give you too much more, but it was a short novel, but spectacular. Absolutely loved it. I gave it 4 stars. Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil by John Berendt. I've been told for many years that this book was very good, a great example of reportage, and that the movie was good as well. But the ship has sailed, I think, on the movie because Kevin Spacey ruins everything. But this book had been like in my Scribd saved list for a while, so I figured it was about time to give it a try. I had to take into account that it was written in the 1990s, so taking that into account, also the fact that the author is reporting on events, essentially, though he is taking part in them, but when he writes about casual racism, etc., it was just on the line. Like, it was difficult for me to kind of like ascertain, is he hanging out with a bunch of racists, or is he also too maybe racist a little bit? The casual transphobia and fetishization of the sole trans woman that he knew at that time was a little more uncomfortable because of the frequent descriptions of her as cartoonish almost was a little upsetting. All told, the author did a good job of reporting the events in the book, which include, you know, grifters and murderers. It was exciting as a story, and it was actually written well, aside from that. So 3 stars. So here's the thing. Notes on Growing Up, Getting Older, and Trusting Your Gut by Alyssa Mastromonaco. I really wanted to like this. I did. Alyssa Mastromonaco is a co-host of Crooked Media's Hysteria podcast, which I do not subscribe to, but I do subscribe to Crooked Media's YouTube channel, which delivers longer podcasts in bite-sized chunks. And so I do from time to time listen to, I suppose, the Hysteria podcast. And I wanted to enjoy this. I thought that it was going to be more memoir, lessons that she had learned in her career, in addition to, you know, personal historical info. There was a little bit of that, but it was also kind of like not a self-help guide, but a series of suggestions or tips in terms of becoming a grown-up career lady. And I'm always wary of people who have that sort of advice when they're coming from either a limited or privileged perspective. And I don't know, a lot of it didn't pass the vibe check. I did, though, strongly relate to her portrayal of living with a chronic illness. She has, I can't remember, she either has IBD or Crohn's disease, and the massive inconvenience of having to deal with that while having any job, much less a demanding one, is, I felt that. Not enough to save it, though. My only 2-star review. Next, Survival of the Thickest by Michelle Buteau. I have nothing to say about this book other than 5 stars. My favorite genre, possibly of all time, is memoir. My favorite memoirs are by comedians. She and I have almost nothing in common, but I felt still just, she was intensely relatable. Absolutely hilarious. Perfect mix of personal life, personal history, and jokes. 10 out of 10, no notes. Hang on. The true irony is, how are you going to write a book for people with ADHD and have a title this long? The Queen of Distraction, How Women with ADHD Can Conquer Chaos, Find Focus, and Get More Done by Terry Matlin. This was fine. It's not what I thought it was going to be, but then I didn't have high expectations for it in the first place. It was mostly a manual for domestic issues. Using examples, it described common issues that women with ADHD face that impact relationships and affect day-to-day tasks and potential solutions. I personally couldn't put a lot of any of it into practice because I could not extract the suggestions from their domestic context. Again, it was fine. 3 stars. Names for the Sea, Strangers in Iceland by Sarah Moss. In addition to comedian/comic actor memoirs, I do also really enjoy travel memoirs. That's not exactly what this was, but a lot of it was similar. This is a memoir by Sarah Moss in which she spends a year with her family, her husband and her 2 sons, in Iceland while she teaches at a local university during the global recession in 2008. It was pretty good. It had a lot of elements to it. You had culture shock, being in a new place, being in a place that treats children differently, being able to access the food that she's used to eating. It had a lot of stuff. There was a lot that I found unrelatable, but that's not necessarily the point of memoir. So again, that didn't necessarily affect my review. I overall enjoyed it, gave it 3 stars. The Archive of Alternate Endings by Lindsay Drager. I really wish that I remembered more of this book. I remember a lot, but I wish I remembered more because no matter how I describe it and how much time I spend on it, I really don't think that I'm going to do this book justice. Okay, so there are multiple points of view that all correspond with times at which Halley's Comet is visible in the sky. So points in time from the 15th century to I think 2221. It uses the folk tale Hansel and Gretel as a persistent theme, like aspects of the tale as a theme throughout the book. So Johannes Gutenberg's niece has a secret that she entrusts to her brother. Wilhelm and Jacob Grimm are actually writing and rewriting the story of Hansel and Gretel to integrate a story that Wilhelm learns about his brother. An academic is shunned by his family and meets, for lack of a better term, kind of like an analog to The Witch in the Woods. Twin space probes communicate with each other, telling the story back and forth in binary. This book has everything. Fairy tale retelling, social commentary on the AIDS crisis, eco-sci-fi, domestic drama, tragedy, Johannes Gutenberg. I will recommend it to everyone as long as there is breath in my body. 5 stars. Fountainville by Tishani Doshi. Now, if it wasn't for Goodreads telling me that I had read and reviewed this book, I would have no memory of encountering it at all. I gave this book 3 stars, so I must have enjoyed it. Otherwise, I have no idea. I'm sorry to this man. Daughter of the White River, Depression-era Treachery and Vengeance in the Arkansas Delta by Denise White Parkinson. I have largely broken up with true crime unless it has some sort of historical aspect, some historical element that is relevant to my interests. And this is one of 2 books about Great Depression era true crime that I found. If you know of any more, if you've heard of any, please definitely let me know. I really like this. Not only was it very interesting to learn about the houseboat communities along the White River, which I knew absolutely nothing about, but also how the media, print media obviously, had far greater freedom in terms of access to cases, to police, and how they were able to influence not only public opinion, but the court cases themselves. It was actually very short, but very, very good. 3 stars. Next is The Electricity of Every Living Thing by Catherine May. This is a memoir, and it is about May, again, after having been married and having a child, finding herself struggling in her day-to-day life, and here's a radio program about autism, and she finds that mirrors a lot of her own personal experience, wonders if she has it. Huge surprise, she does. So I told you there was going to be a theme. That happens a lot. So she describes how she copes, and it's framed within this story of how she decides to walk the entirety of England's southwest coast path. So the book is actually broken up into sections or chapters that are actually sections of the path. So she not only describes how she does that, how she actually manages to walk these giant chunks of this path, but also describes how she's adjusting not only to this change in her life, but also the accommodations that she is reticent to ask for, but discovers that she needs, and how she's dealing with that personally and domestically. It is authentically written, and the pace is great. I gave this book 5 stars. Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman. I think that I am satisfied if I consider the book, Practical Magic, and the film, Practical Magic, as 2 distinctly separate things. Because I know what it is like to be upset when a movie is not like a book, but I find that for me, it kind of goes both ways. Even though the basic plot and the names of the characters, all of that is the same in both of these books, I am simultaneously upset that the book is not like the movie, and that the movie is not like the book. They are both very separate, very good stories. The characterizations, however, of the characters in the film are actually not like the characters in the book. I was also under the impression that the book was going to be a little spookier, I guess, or like the atmosphere of the book was going to be a bit darker. It was darker than the movie, of course, but it was just, I guess, being generous, you might be able to call it a thriller. I did enjoy it. The reason that I had read this book was that I knew that Rules for Magic was coming out. And while not a prequel, it's supposed to be about an ancestor of the characters in the book Practical Magic. And I thought that it wouldn't necessarily be fair to myself if I didn't read Practical Magic first. And I did read it, and I did enjoy it, but unfortunately, I did not enjoy it enough for me to want to read Rules for Magic. So it is what it is. I still liked it, and I gave it 3 stars. Next is Song for the Unraveling of the World by Brian Evenson. Now, most short story collections are going to be hit or miss. You're not going to love every story in every short story collection. So they tend to average out normally to be about a 3 or a 3.5. Now, Evenson is a horror writer, and this is the first of his collections I have read. Normally what I look for when I am reading horror is a sense of dread or suspense. I did get that in a lot of his stories. Some gore, some supernatural, which again is a-okay for me, but if it doesn't like give me palpitations, I'm gonna knock it down at least a half a star. In general, I think on average, all of these were pretty successful. Unfortunately, I cannot at this moment recall a single one that stood out, but I did enjoy them. And I have another Evenson collection on my TBR, on my saved list, so no complaints. 3 stars. The Devil in the Deep, edited by Ellen Datlove. This is a collection of horror short stories that are oriented around the ocean or the deep dark sea. So they're all like aquatic, I guess, in theme. Like I said, in a short story collection, I'm not going to love every single story, but Ellen Datlove is, in my opinion, probably one of the best horror editors in the game. I think that she actually is responsible for the majority of like the America's Best horror collections that are released annually. Maybe not all of them, but definitely a lot of them. I have absolutely no complaints, 3 stars. And water shall refuse them, Lucy McKnight Hardy. Looking back, I'd probably say that this is a 2.5 rounded up. It was very weird. I'm a big fan of weird, but I think the brevity of the story, the shortness of the book, and the singular point of view left me with a lot of unanswered questions. The premise was great, and it was very atmospheric, and I didn't absolutely hate it, but I do think that it was missing quite a bit. And that's all I've got on that, I think. Okay, next is Midnight in Indigo, 22 Speculative Stories by Black Women Writers. This I actually bought from a Facebook ad. This makes the second ever thing that I have purchased from a targeted social media ad. The first being this 3 John Ralphio Moon shirt, and I like this book more than I like that shirt, so that should tell you a little something about this collection. Midnight in Indigo is a small independent publisher of speculative fiction and horror written exclusively by Black women writers. I'll link them below if you want to go ahead and check them out. I also believe that they might have some stories published on there as well, so if you want to read some of those. I rated this 4 stars, which is of course higher than average, than most fiction collections of short fiction. I don't remember all of the stories, of course, but if you wanted specific recommendations from this book, the ones I think that I enjoyed a great deal are Vessel, The Watchers, Esoterica Tea Shop, I think stand out, but all of the stories are actually very, very good. Yeah, 4 stars. Next, Piranesi by Susanna Clark. This book slapped. What started out as what I thought was going to be kind of a commentary on man in his relationship to the world around him, his relationship to nature, kind of became something more thrillery and sci-fi-y, which was, again, very exciting to me. I'm not going to go into it too much. I'm sure a lot of people have reviewed this book. Also, there isn't a lot that you can say, probably without spoiling a vital part of the plot, so I'm going to leave it there, but say that I absolutely loved it and rated it 4 stars. Fragile Things, Short Fictions and Wonders by Neil Gaiman. This is a reread. Neil Gaiman is my comfort zone. I enjoy pretty much everything that he writes, particularly his short fiction. I think of his short fiction collections, this might be my second favorite. I'm thinking about doing a vlog on Neil Gaiman books, maybe like a Neil Gaiman reading vlog. So I'm not going to get too much into the contents of the book or kind of spoil my rankings just yet. But to say I loved it, and yeah, every track a banger. 4 stars. Never Caught: The Washingtons' Relentless Pursuit of Their Runaway Slave, Ona Judge by Erica Armstrong Dunbar. Man, this is like right in the middle of a very lucky 4-star reading streak. This is a relatively short work of nonfiction, which is pretty self-explanatory. Dunbar does a fantastic job of describing Judge's resourcefulness and the incredibly high stakes involved in the several times potentially she was, almost recaptured. Also makes it absolutely clear what a garbage person George Washington was. Like, you don't need me to tell you that George Washington was trash. In addition to Washington's strategy of cycling or rotating their slaves from Philadelphia back to Mount Vernon approximately every 6 months to evade the emancipation laws in the city of Philadelphia, also makes just impeccably clear Washington's fury at being outsmarted by a Black woman. Just George Washington, 1 star. This book, 4 stars. Only Yesterday, An Informal History of the 1920s by Frederick Lewis Allen. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. It does exactly what it says it does. It is a history. It is not too academic. The author does a really good job of framing events. So not only do you get a chronological order of events, you also get cultural or political phenomena that influence and shape those events. This author is also incredibly prolific. He has an informal history of the 1930s, which I am also now eager to read. 4 stars. Nobody Cares by Anne T. Donahue. I love collections of essays when they're funny and irreverent. I mean, who doesn't? I think in addition to humor, what I like or what I look for mostly is relatability. And this is just a collection about being in your 20s and 30s and messing up and learning from your mistakes, but it's done in a way that really makes it memorable. I really enjoyed it. 4 stars. House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielowski. I want to say that I liked this book. I also want to say that I resent this book. It was a lot of work to read with disproportionate payoff. I read this for Kayla's Literally Dead book club, and I think the live show was probably the most valuable overall experience from reading the book. Like I said before, when I am reading horror, which I believed this book to be, I am looking to feel dread and suspense. This book did have that, but with too many starts and stops that it kind of ruined a little bit of the immersion for me. I considered at one point, because there were a number of things introduced or hinted at that were not resolved, were not followed up on, that I thought that this book was arranged, was composed in such a way that it was to also, much like the theme in the book of Labyrinths, that the book too was composed in such a way that it, like a labyrinth, would also have dead ends and places where you would have to reroute intellectually, I guess. But then I thought about it, and I choose not to believe that, because that's not how you write books. You can't have just plot points that are just hanging there and or forgotten, and it certainly didn't enhance my reading experience, all of the unanswered questions I had by the end. Also, unpopular opinion, I much preferred, out of the entirety of the book, I much preferred Johnny Truant's plotline, like his storyline. Maybe, again, because I found it, I don't want to say relatable, though I have spent a not insignificant amount of my life hanging out with drugged up, tattooed dirtbags. So, I mean, I got that, I understood it, but it was more compelling, it was more interesting to me. Someone who very clearly was suffering from a mental illness and was unmedicated, and this story to which he was exposed was kind of augmenting that for him. And so as he becomes more involved in the story, you get a sense of fear and paranoia and delusion that he gets caught up in, and it just seems much more, I don't know, much more like a compelling story than many of the events that take place within the main text of the story. This review has a caveat. I know that it was released, the story was composed throughout the 1990s. And in the mid-90s, it was distributed in a kind of loose leaf sort of format in Southern California and like the LA area. And so the reader had the opportunity to actually like separate and group together bits of the story to make it a bit more comprehensive. And then also possibly the whole story, but definitely parts at least were published online, not only on Danielewski's webpage, but also in online forums where bits of the story and supplementary information, the appendices and things like that, were actually published and considered to be clues, and people would discuss and talk about what they thought their opinions were, and it was, I don't know, it was more immersive and more creepy because it was analyzed in such a way that it could be construed as actual true events, and it's a completely different experience. I know this because I was in high school in the late 90s and I saw these forums with my own eyes. So like I know that they existed, and I did observe bits of data from the stories, and it was an immersive experience. Unfortunately, being in high school did not have the attention span or need the distraction that all of this information had furnished. So I did not get too invested, but I know that they were there. That having been said, if I had the opportunity to first consume the story in its entirety in a format like that, I definitely believe that I would enjoy it much, much more, because the premise is great. It's sound, the multimedia presentation of the story, and again, all of the supplemental information is borderline genius. But as a completed project, it did not meet my personal expectations. That said, I mean, it is no author's job to impress me. So it is what it is. It took me forever to read, but I managed it, and I didn't hate it. So that's just a lot to say. I gave it 3 stars. Fen by Daisy Johnson. This is a collection of short stories which are linked because they all take place in the same area. They take place in the Fens, which, if I am correct, are in East Anglia, parts of Lancaster, it's not a geography test. It's in the Fens. There is a definite overlap between events that are referenced and characters that appear in the various stories. I don't want to say that it was a delight, because a lot of it was a bummer, but it was, as a collection, very good. I enjoyed it very much and gave it 4 stars. Pew by Catherine Lacey. This book is about a racially ambiguous, androgynous person who one night breaks into a church in a small town, or makes their way into, didn't break in, but makes their way into a church in a small town and falls asleep on a pew. The next morning they wake up and they're surrounded by basically all of the residents of the town. They are kind of taken in by the town, and because they refuse to speak, nobody can get out of this person who they are, what they are. They're trying to get information about pews. They name the person Pew because they don't have a name. So they're trying to get information about Pew's identity from them, but they can't get it because Pew is not speaking. And so not only do you learn more about these people because Pew is not corresponding with them, but the people are talking to Pew. So they kind of reveal a bit about themselves. And as time goes on, as more people try to get information out of Pew, they become increasingly hostile. This is the only Catherine Lacey that I have read, but it was spectacular. I absolutely enjoyed it and gave it 4 stars. Next, Someone Who Will Love You in All Your Damaged Glory by Raphael Bob Waxberg. I heard about this book when Cindy reviewed this book. And once I learned that the creator of BoJack Horseman had a collection of short stories, It took me absolutely no time to get a copy for myself. I love BoJack Horseman in the way that I love many things that destroy me emotionally. The stories are borderline surrealist, and it's not like anything that I've ever read before, and I think that is why I enjoyed it so much, was because of the novelty, and I was excited to read something so different. In hindsight, I'm not 100% sure why I rated it so highly exactly. I actually gave this book 5 stars, but I'm not upset by the idea of having to read this book again to determine what made me like it so much. But I did, I really did. On Being Insane, In Search of My Missing Pieces by Elliot Keenan. This is a memoir by Keenan, who is autistic, trans, and has received a bipolar 2 diagnosis. He has a focused interest in the DSM, or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, and this becomes beneficial to him as he's, throughout the course of the memoir, hospitalized for multiple bipolar episodes. It's a story essentially about looking for people to understand him and understanding himself. I enjoyed it. Much like Odd Girl Out, however, I found personally that the order in which it was written was a little confusing. But again, that's just me. I did enjoy it, and I gave it 3 stars. Next, The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle by Haruki Murakami. This was another book club pick. The story begins essentially when the main character loses his cat and goes to look for it in like a back alley near his neighborhood. There are flashbacks and magical seeming women, and I gotta be honest with you, I think the farther away I get from this book, the less I like it based on my memory of it. And I don't know if it's the translation, but all of the characters, I think maybe with the exception of one, seem strangely detached. And based on what I knew of Murakami's reputation for being this like a prolific literary writer, but I was surprised by his depictions of women. Like, Murakami, in this book at least, writes women in the way women joke about men writing women. All of the women in this book are like breasts and hats, and I don't know why necessarily. Almost like he's an alien trying to describe what he thinks women are. It's very weird. It's very weird. But I did give this book 3 stars. And now, finally, the last book, Vera by Carol Edgarian. This is an historical novel set in San Francisco in 1906, which is the year that much of the city was essentially destroyed by a massive earthquake and then the subsequent fires. Though there's a significant amount of action, the majority of the story is domestic. Vera, title character, has relationships with a number of people, which I can't specify because I think it would be very easy to spoil, and those relationships change over time. The author deals with the extraordinary amount of racism towards Chinese migrants about as well and as honestly as she can, though there aren't really a large number of Chinese characters in the book in the first place. Overall, though, I have no complaints. I enjoyed it and gave it 3 stars. And that's it. And that's it. And I want you to know the commitment to this video, because I need you to know that it has been 2 hours and 10 minutes. 2 hours and 10 minutes that I've sat here trying to describe books, a lot of which I don't remember. So I need to do a little bit better about taking notes or actually writing reviews, which would definitely be smart. Subsequent videos, later videos are probably going to be better, though I make no promises for the next one because I have to do this again a month from now, which I believe will actually be a longer list. But I'm not all the way through, so I will have more notes. And so hopefully it'll go a little better, it'll go a little smoother. And then starting in August, I'll just do monthly wrap-ups, and they won't be ridiculously long and rambly. And that's it. And that's it. We're done. If you are still here, why? I don't even want to be here, but thank you. Thank you very much for sticking around and bearing with me. I don't know about you, but I am exhausted, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop here, and I will see you very soon in my next video.